I heard the shell crack before I saw him fall. That sound, it was like breaking a thick calabash, sharp and final. I'll never forget it. It echoed through the trees louder than the birds screaming above. Tortoise was falling, tumbling through the branches, and when he hit the ground, everything went quiet. Let me tell you how we got there. Everyone in the village knew Tortoise. He was always up to something, always trying to take more than he gave. I remember the time the village gathered to cook a giant pot of soup for a festival. Everyone brought something: yams, meat, spices. Tortoise didn't bring anything. He just sat there telling stories and making everyone laugh. But when the soup was ready, guess who was first in line with the biggest bowl? Tortoise. He filled it to the brim and left barely enough for the rest of us. When someone asked why he didn't contribute, he just grinned and said, but my stories made the soup sweeter, didn't they? That's how he was, greedy, but clever enough to get away with it. Another time, he tricked the animals during a famine. There wasn't much food, so everyone agreed to pool their supplies and share. Tortoise promised to guard the storeroom, saying, "You can trust me. I'll make sure no one steals." For days, the animals noticed the food disappearing bit by bit. When they confronted Tortoise, he pretended to be shocked. "It must be thieves," he cried, wiping crumbs from his mouth. When I saw him talking to the birds that day, I knew he was up to no good. They were planning their annual feast in the sky, and Tortoise wanted in. He couldn't stand the thought of missing out. "I want to join you," he said, smiling his sly smile. "I'll even bring a special gift for the feast." The birds were hesitant. They knew Tortoise's reputation. "How will you get to the sky?" one of them asked. "With your help," he said. "Each of you can give me one feather. I'll make wings, and we'll fly together. Think of it as a family celebration." The birds didn't want to seem selfish, so they agreed. I stood hidden, watching as they plucked feathers and handed them over. By the end, Tortoise had built a strange pair of wings. They looked uneven and awkward, but they worked. "Thank you, my brothers," he shouted as he flapped his way into the sky. The feast was grand, or so I heard. The birds had brought all kinds of food, fruit, roasted nuts, and honey, but as usual, Tortoise took more than his share. "My name is Everyone," he told them when he arrived. "So, whenever food is passed, remember, it's for everyone." The birds didn't realize what he meant until they saw him eating and eating, piling his plate high while they went hungry. When it was time to take leftovers home, Tortoise said, "Send them to my house. My wife will cook it for all of us later." Of course, he had no intention of sharing. That's when things turned. I was sitting under a tree when I heard the shouting above me. The birds had caught on to his tricks. They weren't going to let him get away with it this time. One by one, they pulled out their feathers from his wings. Tortoise tried to fly, but he couldn't. He started falling, twisting and turning, hitting branches on the way down. And then that sound, crack. When I ran to where he landed, I couldn't believe what I saw. His shiny, smooth shell was broken into jagged pieces. He lay there groaning, unable to move. The birds circled above, their shadows flickering on the ground like angry spirits. One of the elders arrived, shaking his head. "Tortoise never learns," he said. "This is what happens when you take more than your share." Tortoise survived, but he was never the same. His shell stayed cracked, a reminder of his greed. Sometimes at night, I think about all the times he tricked us, and then I think about that sound, the crack of his shell, and wonder if he finally learned his lesson. But knowing Tortoise, I'm not so sure.